Good morning. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to explain how I built my water chiller. So there's a few things that you need to get before you start. So the first few things you're going to need is you're going to need an aquarium pump, some way to pump water. You'll need one of these. Second, what you're going to need is you're going to need a way to read your temperature. I just use a digital tester, and it has degrees in Fahrenheit on it with a K-type thermometer. That's all I use. Then you're going to need roughly about 10 feet of 1/2 inch or 3/8 hosing of some sort, whether it's silicone, nylon braid, garden hose, whatever. You just need some way to transport your water from your cooler to whatever you need to use the chilled water for. Next, you're going to need the smallest AC unit or the biggest, depending on what size of something that you're going to be cooling. So I just have a 5,000 BTU window mount AC unit. Then you're going to need a 120 quart cooler. It doesn't have to be Coleman, it can be Igloo, whatever. I just went to Walmart and bought what was cheap. This, I believe, was $59. This was $134, I believe. 5,000 BTU AC system. That's all you need. And then a 120 quart cooler. You're going to need jigsaw. You're going to need some sort of a drill. And you're going to need a skill saw. Some screwdrivers, Phillips straight, and I use a multi-screwdriver. Safety glasses, very, very important. And a Sharpie, that's all you need. Okay, so what I did, very first thing, is make sure that you pull the knobs off your AC system, right? Okay, we got that established. You don't want to break those controls. Now you got to get this face off. There's 2 screws on the front, or however many. Very, very careful on this AC unit up front here. So I just slide this up here, pop this face off. Now I have already taken this completely all apart, and I have taken all the front all completely out. So I'll explain what I did. So here's a fan in the back. In the very front is your evaporator coil, which makes your cold air. So you want to take this evaporator coil that is right here on the side. So here's my evaporator coil. This thing's kind of stuck, but this is my evaporator coil right here. This normally was up here. So what you want to do is very, 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 very carefully, I can't stress that enough, is to take that, you want to take this evaporator coil out from here, and you want to get it turned down either to the side, which this unit, we have to go to the side because of where the piping is in the side of the AC unit. And you have to take off the thermometer. This is the thermometer, which normally goes in front. This will limit you, if you keep this on that evaporator coil, it'll only limit you to a certain temperature of cold water. So I took it out, snuck it up to the side, and I stick it right onto the side of the AC unit itself, so it's out in the ambient air. That way I can get this water down to where it's probably actually going to freeze, so right around 32 degrees, which we don't want that, right? Because the colder that this gets, the longer it runs, you're going to get a lot of condensation on this line right here, which is the suction side of the line, and it's going to cause a bunch of freezing. So you don't want to have ice on this. So if you see ice, you just turn it off, let it sit. It'll thaw out and then start back up. So make sure that you're very, very careful not to kink any of these corners that are on this copper line. When you take this evaporator coil, this, from here to here, and make sure that you don't bend any of these aluminum fins. They're very, very thin. So now that you have the AC unit taken apart, you take everything off, you take the fan off, and all you do is just leave this shaft on this. That's it. Just leave that exposed because you're not going to be messing with anything in there. Leave the controls, put everything back together. I had to cut the side out with a grinder. If I need to go into more details, please throw a comment out there and let me know if I need to go into further detail. I wish I would have done this before, that way you could have saw the whole entire process, but you kind of get the idea. So once I have that down, everything is gone. You know, this is all relatively safe, even if you did leave it open. I put everything back together because I want it to look fairly nice. So I'm going to put this cover back on, right? Because I'd like to have it on there. And I'm going to put my controls back on. Doesn't matter, just as long as these buttons line up. I'll put these back on somewhere. They line up. Maybe not. We're getting kind of sensitive here. Okay, there we go. So I got my buttons on. I got my cord. Cord is out the bottom. Normally the cord is out the front anyway because that sticks inside your house. So now that we have that all done, we can focus on the cooler. So what I did with the cooler is I made a platform for the AC unit to set on, so it's not pushing down on the lid. Because once we compromise this lid, then there's no structure to it anymore. So you determine where you want to put your cooler on your lid. So I determined I wanted to put my cooler evaporator coil on the end. Instead of turning it sideways and everything else, I want it blowing out the back. Now remember, the fan is still connected in the back, which you have to have that in order to cool the condenser in the back. Okay, the condenser takes and makes it from hot, turns it back into cold. That's a big story. I can explain that later. If you want to know any about how Freon works in a compressor in an AC unit, I can explain that later. But so I determined I wanted it on the side. So roughly measure how wide of an opening you're going to need and roughly how long you want it. You don't want that evaporator coil to be right up tight against. You want airflow, water flow to go through the evaporator coil. So you can put your return water in on one side, flows through your evaporator coil to your pump on the other side. That way you get that heat and cold transfer through the water. Then you need to determine where and what you're going to do for a hose. I just drilled a 3/4 inch hole. That way I can stick my hosing that I have through the hole. Don't need a bulkhead fitting. That way I can just stick this hose right through the hole and down into the cooler onto the pump. Okay? Next, you need to figure out if you want an opening on the side to gain access to the pump. I have an access door on the end of the cooler, which is about 8 inches off the very end, and I put a couple of stainless steel hinges on it because this is a wet area, so I don't want anything to rust, and I need to be able to get access down into the cooler to my pump and to look at the water, drain the water, clean the cooler, whatever, without totally disassembling the whole thing. So once you have a hole cut, this is where you're going to use your jigsaw, or you can use a hole saw and a skill saw. You don't have to necessarily use that. Use a skill saw to cut the lid in half. I just used a 1/2 inch drill bit all the way down through, and then I took a step bit and step bit down through the lid. Keep in mind that there's styrofoam in the lid, and like I said before, once you compromise the lid, the structure is no longer there, so you need to put some sort of platform on the top of it to hold the AC unit because it's still quite heavy. So now once you have that, you can go ahead and slide your lid, you know, have your lid made however you want it made. Now you can take this AC unit and you can set it down on top of your cooler. Okay? So keep in mind, you got to be very careful with this thing because it's fragile. Okay? You don't want to bend any of those fins. So now once it's set there, you can slide it into its little home, its little platform, okay? Make sure it's where it's sitting. Make sure it's all secure. I like the way it sits. Now you can see how the coil sets down into the cooler, fits great in there. And it just hangs there. That's all it does, just hangs there. It's not really hurting anything by just hanging there because you're not pulling on it, you're not moving it or anything else. So that's basically how I secure. I just let it sit here on top. I'm not moving it, I'm not touching it, you know, so I don't really have to mess with anything. So now that you have the hinges that you took off the lid prior, correct? So we took the hinges off. I put the hinges just kind of in the center of the lid, just to keep the lid from moving, okay? So I just put the hinges don't have to be anywhere special, right? I just did this so that the lid doesn't want to be moving around as I'm going out to fill it up or I go out to empty it. So we'll put these hinges back on right quick. Phillips bit and some sort of cordless drill. Keep in mind this is plastic, so you just want to just barely put these in. You can start them with a drill, and you can finish them up with a screwdriver if you want to. It doesn't have to be snug. It just keeps the lid from moving around is all it's going to do. Okay? So now that we have these, grab these four right quick right back here. Now the reason that I built this chiller is because I was spending a lot of money on running water and making ice and wasting ice. To me, just running water is nonsense. You know, we don't need to waste our resources that way. So this way, I never have to waste much water. I can reuse it, reuse it, reuse it, and reuse it. So now that I have the lid secured, the lid can't move now. All it's going to move is this part over here that you cut off to gain access. So now that you have that, take your hose, wherever you're going to put it. You can use a bulkhead fitting here. You can use whatever you want to get this hose down to your pump. You don't have to use just a hole like I did. So I just used a hole because it was quicker for me. And I made the hole pretty snug. That way I don't have any chance of bugs or anything to get inside my cooler. So now we'll grab the pump. So here's another point. If you have this pump down inside here and you try to close this lid, you're going to pinch the cord. So you have to come up with a way to keep this cord down from getting pinched by the lid. So I just took and notched the side, is all I did, just notched it a little bit for the cord to lay into. So when I shut my lid, my cord doesn't get pinched. And I also use it to put my thermometer through that as well to keep that from getting pinched as well. So now you just want to determine where the bottom of your hose is going to be at versus your pump, and just run it straight in there. That's it. That's all you got to do. Hook that up. Now you're done. Now you're ready to go. Now you have a chiller. So now you have two cords. The other thing you might want to try to do is you want to try to get a power strip. I grabbed a power strip from the hardware store. So I only have one cord because I only have one extension cord running with this. So I'll wrap this around nice and neat, trying to be careful so we don't bend any of these copper lines that we just exposed. We don't want to have any problems here. So now I have this. I'm going to hook this up to one spot of the power strip somewhere in here. I think I'm going to have to go here. There we go. And then I'm going to hook up my pump to another outlet in the power strip. So now I have an off and an on, okay? That way I can just turn the whole thing off and I can turn it on at my leisure. So now I'll just kind of tuck this underneath here just a little bit so it'll hold it up out of the way. Everything is tucked nice and neat around the unit. Now I only have one cord. So now I only have one cord that I just plug into an extension cord. You can wrap these cords up. I like to wrap them up and stick them underneath, that way that they're completely out of the way. I will tidy these up later with a zip tie and tuck them underneath so that they're out of the way. They don't get pulled on by anything. So you have your AC unit mounted. We have the evaporator coil inside, and we have our hose hooked to our pump. So now what you want to do is you want to turn it on, okay? And you want to circulate your water through it. But do not turn that on unless it's submerged in the water, because it's not going to be doing you any good if it's just in the open air. It'll just freeze. There's no way to transfer the cold out of the evaporator coil into water. So when I'm doing that, I just take my hose all the way off, and I use garden hose fittings on the ends of my garden hoses. That way that I can attach it to all my cooling that I need to have. I use just male and female garden hose connections because it's so much quicker. So when I'm cooling, when I want to start cooling water, I just put this on this side of the evaporator coil. My pump is on that side. So when I have this full of water and I'm circulating, I'm pulling it from that side on that side. So my discharge is on that side, my return is on this side. That way I get the flow through the evaporator coil to make sure that I'm circulating through the evaporator coil and getting the most efficiency out of that coil that I can. So roughly my water temperature in the garage will be right around about the 80 to 82 mark, with this setting for a few days. It takes roughly about an hour to about an hour and a half to go from 83 degrees down to about 47 degrees, which I normally run around about 47 to 45 degrees. So when I start my project, I'll go ahead and roll this out by the end of the garage, because keep in mind it's going to be blowing hot air out the back. I undo my hose, I get my extension cord, I plug it in, and I turn it on, and I just let it run full blast. Okay, so I'll just put this on the highest setting that it has. I'll turn the coldest temperature all the way up and just let it go. Put your thermometer in and periodically check your water. Now when you start getting too cold, the outside of the evaporator, where it's exposed to the atmosphere and has no insulation on it, will start to freeze. You'll collect condensation and it'll start getting cold. When the water temperature starts getting down below about 45 degrees is when you'll start noticing that the outside of this evaporator coil piping will start to freeze. So when it gets down to that temperature, right around that 45, 47, 48, somewhere around in there, below 50, okay, just shut it off for a few minutes. You're not going to lose any that you've already gained, okay, in temperature. Just let that thaw out for a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, turn it back on. The cooler will keep that water cold. And then just get it down to whatever temperature you want. They also make a control that you can set your temperature at. You can plug this into, and you can just run your pump into a cord. Just let your pump run, okay? Your aquarium pump that you're using for your hose. You just let that run. And you can have a controller that will control the temperature of the water through itself instead of turning the AC unit off and on. I haven't gotten that far yet, but I sure will in the future. So that is basically how I made my AC unit. If I need to go into more detail, just make a comment, send me a message, whatever. But I hope this helps. I've had a lot of inquiries on how I built my chiller, and if I can help a couple of people, then I believe I accomplished my mission. If you need any help, if you need to FaceTime me, whatever, feel free. I will be more than happy to walk you through. If you're not very mechanically inclined, I would suggest find a friend to help you, because that way you can learn, because I don't want you to spend $150 on something and then just bend it if you're unsure on what you're doing. I hope that helps. Like, subscribe, comment. If you have any questions, feel free. So there we go. Nice little 5,000 BTU AC unit water chiller. Thank you.